Well, welcome to another flip video lesson with Mr. Volkman. Today's flip video lesson is going to cover 8.2b. And we're going to talk a little bit about leaders for minority rights. In the previous flip video of 8.2a, I talked about some of the ways that minorities throughout Seattle specifically and Washington State fought for equality. This video now is going to look at some very specific leaders and what they did. We'll then end today's video, or tonight's, depending when you're watching, with looking at a very important decision that was critical for Native Americans. Remember, this is an academic video, so please make sure you're filling out your notes as you're watching. And if there's anything you do not understand, please make sure you rewind the video and watch it or listen to it again. What we're going to talk about is a gentleman by the name of Wing Luke. Now, Wing Luke is very important because he was the first Asian American who was voted into a public office not only in Seattle, Washington, but in all of the Pacific Northwest, which is quite an important thing to know. If you remember back in earlier chapters of Washington State history, people of Asian descent had a very difficult time in our state, whether it was during the Chinese Exclusion Act or the Japanese Relocation Act. So having a gentleman like Wing Luke into public office and having people vote for him showed how far we had come as a state in allowing people from minority groups into our culture. Now, Wing was born in China in 1925. He moved to America, though, when he was 5. So for all intents and purposes, he was definitely as American as you or I. What's kind of interesting about Wing is that he was bullied in school, a lot because of how he looked and because he was different. However, and this is important, he used art and humor to get through this and to connect with other people. He was able to find a commonality through art and through humor. And it's definitely something he used throughout his whole life because he was eventually elected class president in high school. He then went on to fight in World War I. Now, as you can see so far, Wing Luke is living a pretty big life. He's made a lot of strides, a lot of achievements have come his way. Now, he ended up coming back from World War I because his family needed help. You see, when his family moved over to America, they had started a laundromat business. Now, during the war, the landlord that owned the business and their home felt that Wing Luke's family was part of the enemy. So the landlord upped the price of rent, so much so that the family could not afford it, and they had to close their doors. Now, it was through this pretty hard, painful, sad moment in Wing's life that his political career started. I think we can say safely that he saw in his own family's hardship that other people struggled with the same. And he used his influence later in life to help these kind of people. He went to UW. He had graduated from there. He became Assistant Attorney General in Washington State. He was voted into public office. And he beat the person next closest to him by 30,000 votes. That's seriously, that's a lot. 30,000 votes. I'm going to write that down. Let's see here. That's 1,000 votes. That's how much he beat the person who was, next to him in line. Gotta erase that. Now, Wing Luke, when he was finally in office as a city councilman, he pushed for social issues, such as native fishing rights. He also pushed for fair land and employment opportunities with people who were of minority ethnicity. Now, Wing Luke died at the age of 45. Not because he was sick or some weird catastrophe happened, but because the plane he was in when he was flying over the Cascade Mountains crashed. Now that's pretty sad, thinking this guy so far had lived such a prominent life. It's even more sad to think of what he could have become. You see, people had thought that Wing Luke could have been the next mayor of Seattle. People also thought he could have been voted to Congress. Interesting. I wrote a talk about is a man by the name of Tomasz Villanueva. Now, Mr. Villanueva was the founder of the United Farmer Workers of Washington State, or the UFW. Now, he started in America at the age of 14. So he was a little older than Wing. And his family followed the crops when they moved up here, which just means that his family went wherever there was work on farms. Wherever there was a harvest that needed to be brought in, that's where his family went. And eventually they ended up in Washington State. Now, education was a very important part for Mr. Villanueva's younger years, and his family made sure that he and his siblings were educated, even if there were gaps between that education. Now, later in this gentleman's life, in Mr. Villanueva's life, he went to California to listen to a man by the name of Cesar Chavez. Now, Mr. Chavez was a very outspoken individual for the rights of minority farm workers, and he had set up shop in California, as I said. Now, when Mr. Villanueva came back to Washington State, he started the UFW in Toppenish, Washington, which is eastern Washington. And through his organization, he was able to help minority workers, specifically Hispanic minority workers, with getting food, whether it was like food stamps or sharing food. And the big part that he helped them with was getting wages for workers when the planter or the farmer in charge of the farm wasn't paying those wages. Mr. Villanueva made sure that those people got paid for their job. He also started a health co-op, and from my research, this is definitely something he was very proud of. I watched a video interview of him when he was an older gentleman, and his voice definitely showed that he was proud of this health co-op. He also led a boycott of grapes. And here it says grades. That should be grapes. So he led a boycott of grapes. And this was to support Mexican workers in California who were not getting paid as they were working on grape farms. He also led a strike with farm workers in his area. Now, these farm workers worked on a hop farm, which is a crop used in the making of alcohol. Now, a funny story about this, Mr. Villanueva was actually on vacation when this strike occurred. He actually didn't necessarily start it from what I heard when I was listening to his interview, but they called him and said, "Hey, we want you up here." So he and his wife packed up their kids and they headed back up to Washington. I think they were in Oregon at the time on vacation. So Mr. Villanueva definitely was a very influential man for Hispanic and all minority groups. I'd like to talk about the Boldt Decision. Now, before we get into actually what the Boldt Decision was, let's do a little recap of things that we learned about almost 3 or 4 or 5 months ago. Now, when we first talked about Washington State history, we talked about how Native Americans were the first group of people who lived here. Then settlers came in from the eastern part of our country. And because of that, treaties were made with these Native Americans. In the treaties, it talked about how Native Americans were going to be able to fish and hunt in their usual or accustomed lands. Now, these treaties were made around 1854 and 1855, and that's when the natives were given their rights for fishing. However, as more and more settlers moved into Washington, they were displacing these Native Americans, pushing them out of their fishing lands, and a lot of the reason was because these guys had better fishing techniques. Now, let's fast forward to the 1900s, before you kiddos were born, and things such as fishing started happening as a way to show Native Americans frustration over the fact that they were not able to fish where they were supposed to based on these treaties. Now, fishings usually had a couple different things. First off, people would fish without a permit, which was illegal based on the state of Washington. So Native Americans were doing no-nos that way. Also, Native Americans were using illegal techniques while they fished, such as setting nets and traps. You're not allowed to do that when you're fishing in Washington State. Now, here's the problem. These Native Americans, even though they weren't able to do this based on our state's laws, this is how Native Americans had fished forever. They'd always used nets and traps. And all of a sudden, they're being told that, hey, you can't use those things and you can't fish in your accustomed and usual land. Well, 1974, something pretty big happens. The Boldt Decision by Judge Boldt from the Supreme Court. And he reaffirmed, or he emphasized, the fishing rights that Native Americans had, especially in Washington State. He said they could fish in their usual and accustomed places, even if it was not in their tribe. He also said that 50% of all the annual catch of every year belonged to Native Americans. 50%. So that's half. Half of every fish caught belonged to Native Americans. As you can tell, or probably guess, fishermen who weren't natives were very upset about this. Judge Boldt, though, also said that all tribes that did not have tribal land were not going to be recognized by the federal government. So any treaty or any law that was made wouldn't count for these tribes that didn't have reservation land. Judge Boldt said that it was not up to the states to tell tribes how to manage something that always belonged to them. So think about that. It's like I can't go to you and tell you how to use your things in your bedroom or your house, because those belong to you, and it always has, not to me. Well, thank you for watching this flip video. Please make sure you're taking the notes. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me as well. Thank you, and have a good night.